Donna lived with her husband, Walter, who had become more and more controlling even though he didn't work. Walter stayed at home and handled the housework, while Donna worked to support them financially. Their arrangement was supposed to provide stability, but Walter's controlling behavior made Donna feel like her efforts didn't matter. One day, Walter, with a smug look on his face, announced that he was going to let his parents move into their house and suggested that Donna could live with her in-laws without even asking her opinion. Donna was shocked and speechless at his audacity, especially since she owned the house. This moment was a breaking point for her. She had tolerated Walter's overbearing attitude for too long. Walter often gave orders as if he had the right to do so. Once he even demanded that Donna get him ice cream late at night while he relaxed, even though she was exhausted from work. When Donna suggested he could get it himself, Walter laughed and hinted that upsetting him could lead to consequences. His behavior wasn't just frustrating, it was exhausting. Donna felt increasingly disrespected and unappreciated, and she began to question whether she could continue living with someone who acted superior just because he was the husband. She realized that if things didn't change, she couldn't go on like this. Walter needed to understand how his actions were affecting her, and Donna decided it was time for him to face the consequences of his behavior. At that moment, I realized that dealing with Walter on top of my already stressful job would push my stress levels to the limit. So I told him, "I'm really tired. I'm sorry, I'm going to rest in my room." Walter didn't like my response and blocked my way, challenging me, "Wait, what's with that attitude towards your husband? I could kick you out right now if I wanted to. Do you think it's okay to upset your spouse like that?" He looked furious. I couldn't believe how he could act so authoritative without contributing financially and how easily he could upset me, yet he couldn't handle even the slightest inconvenience himself. It was like dealing with a child's tantrum. "I'm sorry, but I'm exhausted. Please, just try to understand," I replied, forcing a smile, no longer wanting to argue. Walter sighed deeply and muttered, "You're such a disappointment as a wife." I didn't have the energy to argue, so I simply repeated, "I'm sorry," and retreated to my room. Day by day, Walter's overbearing behavior wore me down, but I was too exhausted to confront him. Then one day I caught a severe cold, which the doctor said was caused by stress. I was so sick that I couldn't move, so I took a day off from work and could only lie in bed. When I told Walter about my condition, he snapped, "A cold? That's just an excuse. Go to work. You're useless." His harsh words seemed to make my fever worse. He declared, "I won't be taking care of you. This is your mess, deal with it." So I was left alone in my room, moaning from the fever, with no one to help. I was too weak to prepare anything for myself and didn't want to face Walter again for fear of more verbal abuse. My temperature reached 100 degrees Fahrenheit, and the fever was so intense that my body was drenched in sweat. I couldn't even get up to change my soaked clothes. I lay there, thinking about how much easier things might be if I could just pass away. With these grim thoughts, I endured a painful night alone. Maybe it was the fever talking, but deep down, I knew something had to change. Throughout the night, as the sun disappeared and the stars took over the sky, a deep sense of loneliness and doubt overwhelmed me. I longed for Walter's support, not even to cure my fever, but just to bring me an ice pack, apply a cool compress, and ask if I was okay. Sadly, this was just a fantasy. Instead, the words I received from him were harsh and uncaring, cutting deep and stirring up new anxieties. I questioned why I was the only one suffering, wondering what I had done wrong and why things couldn't be smoother between us. Once these thoughts started, I couldn't hold back the tears. The pain was just too much. After 5 days of rest, my fever finally subsided enough for me to return to work. My colleagues and bosses expressed their concern, asking if I was truly okay to be back. Although I was still recovering, I felt I had to support our household financially and couldn't afford more time off. Their genuine concern touched me deeply, such a stark contrast to Walter's indifference, and it nearly brought me to tears again. At this point, a voice inside me screamed that I couldn't continue dealing with Walter's behavior. I was pushing myself too hard, ignoring the signs that this way of life was unsustainable. Deep down, I knew I couldn't keep going like this without eventually collapsing from the strain. By now, my feelings for Walter had significantly faded, yet I didn't have the energy to think about separation. Amid these overwhelming emotions, I dragged myself through my days, working hard, returning home exhausted, and catering to Walter's unpredictable demands. This had become my daily routine. Then one day, while I was trying to find a moment of peace in my room, Walter called out, wanting to discuss something serious. It had been a long time since we had a real conversation. Typically, Walter would make big decisions on his own. With a heavy heart, I sat down for the discussion, fearing what might come next. To my shock, Walter, with unexpected enthusiasm, announced, "I'm going to let my parents live in this house. You can't even cook, so you need to leave." The first word that slipped out of my mouth was, "What?" He continued, "You need to leave because you're going to live with my in-laws." I was stunned, unable to believe his selfish demands. The situation had reached a breaking point, and I realized something had to change. As Walter continued, he revealed his plans to change the ownership of our house, transferring it to his name and his parents'. He bluntly stated his intentions to divorce me and start a new life, declaring that his decision was final, and that my opinion didn't matter. I felt utterly disregarded, my feelings trampled under decisions made without my consent. Walter, puffed up with his man-of-the-house ego, seemed only concerned with his own desires. My heart sank as I realized the impossibility of continuing life with him. Ignoring my growing detachment, Walter sneered, "You love me so much, don't you? I know this is shocking coming from a husband you love so dearly, but I'm sorry. I just want to take care of my family. Please understand." His words, meant to sound considerate, felt more like a scolding. I wanted to shout that he was wrong. Any affection I once felt for Walter had vanished, leaving only disbelief at his selfishness and regret for not ending things sooner. Why hadn't I left him earlier? If I had, maybe he wouldn't have had the chance to exploit and demean me so thoroughly. I even resented my past self for being too lenient with him. Seeing my visible distress, Walter misinterpreted my pain as lingering love, thinking I couldn't bear the thought of divorce. But he was mistaken. My feelings for him had long since faded into nothing more than disdain for a man who wrongly believed I still cared. Determined to set things straight, I said firmly, "Fine, then I'll leave." Walter gasped, "What?" He hadn't anticipated my readiness to accept the divorce and move on. He needed to understand that the old me who always bailed him out was gone for good. From now on, whatever happened to Walter, he would face it without me because our relationship was over. Seeing my resolve, Walter stood shocked and frozen. I seized the moment to head to my room and pack the essentials. I knew I couldn't take the larger items today and would need to arrange for movers later. As I began to pack, Walter hurried over, perhaps finally realizing the seriousness of the situation. His voice tinged with uncertainty, he asked, "Are you sure about this? If we divorce, we'll be strangers." I smiled softly and replied, "I've already fallen out of love with you. Letting go feels like a weight has been lifted off my shoulders." Hearing this, Walter stood there looking bewildered and lost. I nodded, thanked him for the years we had together, and walked out of the house. His worried expression lingered in my mind as I returned to my parents' home. When I explained everything to my parents, they were initially furious about Walter's behavior, but soon calmed down, reassured by my resolve and the plan I had in place. I began to recover at my parents' home, taking the first steps by initiating the divorce proceedings. After I sent the divorce papers, Walter messaged me, "Are you sure about this? I don't know if it's really a good thing, but I don't have any feelings for you anymore. If we've gone this far, there's no turning back." His message ended with a request to speed up the divorce. "I feel so much better now that you're gone, so fill out the divorce papers quickly," I replied, but received no response. A few days later, I received the completed divorce papers from Walter, with his sections already filled out. I promptly completed my part and submitted it to the county office. Now, Walter and I were officially divorced. During the divorce, we divided our assets. Walter received the house, as he had insisted, so I transferred ownership to him and chose to move on. The house had never really felt like home to me, it was more of a burden. Instead, I sought alimony from Walter, which his parents initially covered since he wasn't working. However, he was now job hunting, likely planning to repay them once he secured employment. But, as often happens, reality doesn't always align with plans. A month after the divorce was finalized, I had moved out of my parents' home and into a new place, enjoying a more peaceful life. Then I received a call from Walter. Honestly, it was annoying. I could guess why he was calling, but ignoring him might lead to more complications, so knowing I'd have to address it sooner or later for the sake of my future, I answered the phone with a firm, "Hello, what do you want?" Completely fed up, I wanted him to get straight to the point. Reluctantly, I listened as he pleaded, "Please help me." His desperate tone made me chuckle. Walter was clearly in a tough spot, and while part of me felt distant, another part was mildly amused by the irony of his desperation. Walter's call caught me off guard. I hadn't expected things to have deteriorated so quickly. "Well, what's going on? You need to tell me the whole story." I replied, half amused by the situation, suspecting why Walter might be struggling but wanting him to lay it all out himself. With a hesitant voice, stumbling over his words, Walter began to explain. He had taken over the house after our divorce and managed it fine for a month. However, he now faced a rent payment he couldn't meet due to his unemployment. Desperate, he had asked my former in-laws, who were on a pension, for help. But the rent was much steeper than anyone anticipated, about $2,500, a sum they couldn't afford on their fixed income. My former in-laws were livid, accusing him of misleading them. "This isn't what we agreed to," they insisted, placing the blame squarely on Walter. Feeling lost and unsure, Walter called me, nearly in tears. I didn't realize the rent would be so high. The place is a mess now. What are you going to do about it? Frustrated and overwhelmed, Walter was now trying to pin the blame on me. Admittedly, I hadn't discussed the specifics of the rent before our separation, but it was Walter's folly to assume responsibility for the house without understanding the financial commitments involved. He had pushed me away, treating me like an outsider, and now he was facing the consequences of his decisions. Despite this, he seemed unable to accept responsibility and reached out to me for help. I couldn't help but sigh at his audacity. Ignoring the strain in his voice, Walter continued urgently, "Please, I need your help. We can't keep going like this. I need you." His desperation was palpable. The rent due date had likely already passed, which meant they might be behind on payments. The landlord of that house had a reputation for being temperamental and strict about rent deadlines. I remember being warned repeatedly when I was still living there, never be late with the rent. If they missed a payment, they would face serious repercussions. Walter, having met the landlord a few times, knew exactly how intimidating they could be. His call was a last-ditch effort driven by sheer desperation. When Walter called me, pleading for help, he said, "Please just cover the rent for 1 month. I don't have anyone else to turn to. You still care about me, right? If someone you care about is in trouble, you should help them out." His tone was still self-centered, as if he hadn't changed at all. I wanted to tell him straight that my feelings for him had long since faded, but instead, I held back and replied coldly, "I'm sorry, but I don't have any obligation to help you. You were the one who cut me off, and now you expect me to assist you when it's convenient for you. That's not fair." Walter tried to defend himself. "Please don't be so cold. I really can't handle this alone. Whether you still love me or not doesn't matter now. We were married once, right? Can't you help me out just this once?" "No, you were the one who left me. Even before that, my feelings for you had already cooled. It's been a long time since I stopped loving you," I responded firmly. Hearing Walter's dejected voice on the other end, he said, "I can't believe it," which struck a chord deep within me. For so long I had endured everything, even when Walter was selfish, took me for granted or mistreated me, especially when I was sick. I stayed by his side, hoping to salvage our marriage. I worked tirelessly for the life we had, but this was the outcome. Why hadn't I left sooner when my love for him faded? Why didn't I distance myself earlier? These regrets flooded in, mingling with the anger I felt toward him. Walter never truly faced me, never showed real concern, never protected me, and never embraced the idea of navigating life together as a team. All this time, he treated me like a maid, a mere money-making machine. Each time he acted this way, he seemed oblivious to my suffering. Yet now, despite all this being a result of his actions, he came pleading for help as if he were the victim. His self-centered attitude was repelling. "Please help me. I'm begging you. What about getting married again? Let's start over properly this time." "I promise I'll never push you away again," Walter proposed desperately. I couldn't help but feel a mix of incredulity and annoyance. How could he think a simple plea for help could erase the years of neglect and misunderstanding? His desperation was evident, but so was the clarity of my decision not to fall back into the same pattern. I had moved on, and it was time for Walter to do the same. I chuckled bitterly at Walter's desperate suggestion. "Are you kidding me? All of this is the result of your actions. I've been trying to find peace in my way for a long time. I kept hoping you would face reality, and now you want me to start over with you, pretending none of that ever happened? Do you expect me to go back to those miserable days? That's never going to happen. I refuse to return to that life, no matter what." Emotions overwhelmed me, and tears started to flow. I couldn't tell if they were from anger or sadness. Walter remained silent on the other end, having nothing to say in response to my words. Unable to continue the conversation any longer, I simply said, "Goodbye," and hung up. Walter didn't call back, and to avoid hearing his voice ever again, I blocked his number. Later, I heard from mutual friends that Walter and his family were evicted from their home. Walter had tried to persuade my former in-laws to cover his rent, but they were furious, refusing his request and further upsetting the landlord. With no other options, they were forced to leave. Walter hasn't had much luck finding a full-time job and is now working part-time to make ends meet. Meanwhile, my former in-laws had to sell their house and are now crammed into a rundown apartment, all three of them together. Meanwhile, I've been deeply focused on my work, and my boss has even discussed a promotion with me. There's a possibility I might become the first female manager in our company, and I've been receiving admiration from both colleagues and juniors. Sometimes friends inquire if I'm thinking about getting married again. Honestly, after my past experiences, I have a rather negative view of marriage. The idea of dating or marrying again doesn't appeal to me right now. But life is long and there's no rush. Many people in this generation live their entire lives happily unmarried. What matters most to me is living a life without regrets and staying true to myself. With that in mind, I want to continue navigating life at my own pace, embracing whatever comes my way with strength and independence.
She said I'm only good enough for dog food, she grumbled. Wow, I never thought I'd feel so embarrassed. Even though we just got married, I've been trying to do things her way. But it seems like it's not enough. Maybe she's from another planet or something. That would explain a lot. I don't understand her language anymore, but I don't really want to talk to her anyway. My name's Allison. I'm 32 and work in an office. I think I got into games because of my older brother who loves them. I've loved games since I was little, especially ones where I pretend to be someone else in a made-up world. I've made a lot of friends online, including my husband Carmen. We both love the same game and have our favorite characters and spells. Whenever a new game comes out, we go buy it together. After hanging out like this for a while, we started to like each other and decided to get married. Carmen's parents are Stanley, who's often away on work trips, and Bianca, who takes care of things at home. Stanley's hardly ever home because of his job. Carmen's grandma, who has Alzheimer's, lives with them too. She's been having a hard time remembering things, especially since Grandpa started traveling. It was a big surprise for everyone. Bianca takes care of Grandma because Carmen used to live alone. So it's just Bianca and Grandma at Carmen's parents' house. I worried about having to take care of someone who wasn't even my parent someday. But Carmen's parents are still healthy, so that day seems far away. I felt pretty relaxed until I got that one phone call. One day, I had some free time, so I finished up my chores and started playing my favorite game. Then, I heard a strange sound in my room. What's that noise? Oh, it's my phone ringing. I don't usually get calls, so I forgot what my ringtone sounded like. When I saw it was Bianca calling, I felt a bit nervous. It was the first time she had ever called me, and I wondered if something was wrong. So I answered quickly, saying, "Hello. You took your time. It's common courtesy for a responsible adult to answer promptly when someone calls." Her sudden sarcasm made me want to hang up, but I stayed on the line. "Sorry, I'll try to be quicker next time. What can I help you with?" As if you have time off on your days off, right? Playing with those silly games? You should be doing your duties as Carmen's wife. After Bianca abruptly hung up, she told me to visit Carmen's parents' house on my next day off. I felt bewildered for a while. Why did I have to deal with sarcasm from a rare phone call? I thought about ignoring it, but she's Carmen's mother, so I figured I should just hear her out. That's how I decided to approach it. Later that night, I told Carmen about the call. "I'm really sorry. It might be a hassle, so you don't have to come with me." It was reassuring to hear him say that, even though it was frustrating. Sometimes I just need a place to unwind after work. "Hello. Oh, Allison, is something on your mind?" Susan from the pottery school greeted me warmly. I went there feeling lighthearted, but now I'm fully engaged in conversation. Susan is around the same age as my grandma, but still vibrant and ready to listen to my problems. She's like a mother figure to everyone. Pottery is fun, but I mostly come here to chat with Susan. "Listen to this, Susan," I began, venting to my friend. I got a rare call from Bianca, and it was just one sarcastic comment after another. "You must have plenty of free time," she said, "or do your duty as a wife." I never expected to hear such outdated remarks. Susan always listens to my complaints without judgment. Just ignore Bianca's nonsense. There are still plenty of old-fashioned people out there. People who talk like that often have double standards. My son's wife deals with the same thing. While I may not have lucked out with Bianca, I'm surrounded by kind people like Susan. It naturally encourages me to keep pushing forward. On my next day off, I followed Bianca's instructions and went over to my in-laws' house. When I parked and approached the door, Bianca was already waiting there. "Oh great," I muttered nervously, trying to keep calm. "Good morning. You're supposed to be here 30 minutes earlier. Don't keep your superiors waiting," she scolded. I had just arrived, and already I wanted to turn around and leave. I can understand being punctual for work, but why should I be scolded for her convenience? Besides, arriving 30 minutes early can be inconvenient for the other person, which I didn't want to do. "Well, it's only 10 minutes early," I tried to explain, but she cut me off. "Don't talk back. Am I running a military camp?" I sighed, feeling defeated. I will never trust this person again, no matter what. And I won't ever agree to take care of her when she's old, even if she offers me a lot of money. No way. "Fine then, you're late for our appointment." Anyway, I'm leaving now, Bianca said, ready to walk away. But wait, I stopped her. You call me here without any explanation, and I have no idea what's going on. Well, I'm going out until tonight, so you'll have to come here on your days off from now on. Do the housework and take care of the person in the back room, Bianca said before driving off. I've never met someone so difficult to communicate with. She seemed nice when I met her with Stanley and Carmen, but that wasn't the case at all. I thought about just going home without doing anything to avoid getting yelled at again. But more than that, I hadn't met my grandmother-in-law yet. Bianca had mentioned her, but since she didn't understand, she decided I didn't need to come to the family wedding. By the way, we only had a simple meal and didn't have a wedding ceremony. Carmen and I were supposed to visit her together later, but our days off never lined up, and embarrassingly, we never made it. As I opened the entrance door, a shocking sight greeted me. It was a mess. It wasn't quite a garbage dump, but it looked like it wouldn't take long to become one. The room was cluttered with stuff, and there was a pile of laundry, clean or dirty, scattered on the floor. The kitchen sink was overflowing with dishes. Dust was gathering in the corners, and it was visibly disgusting. The last time I was here, the place was clean and tidy. What on earth happened? This is awful. As I pondered, I heard noises coming from the back room. Ah, it must be my grandmother-in-law, I thought, deciding to go and greet her. Excuse me. Since the day Bianca called me, I've been going to my in-laws' house as instructed. I've come to realize that Bianca probably spends her days out and only comes home late at night. She doesn't seem to take care of the house or her grandmother-in-law at all. While she bosses me around, telling me to fulfill my wife's duties, it's clear she isn't doing much herself. Maybe she got carried away because I obeyed her commands. She once loudly said, I'm relieved that Carmen, who always plays with toys, finally brought home a wife. But after all, a wife is just a stranger. I guess you're like a free housekeeper. In this day and age, treating your son's wife like this is completely unacceptable. Of course, I told Carmen everything Bianca did, and he kept apologizing every time he heard about it. You don't have to go to that house anymore, he would say. He even offered to talk to Bianca himself, but I asked him to hold off because I had a plan. I kept visiting my in-laws' house because I was worried about my grandmother-in-law. When Carmen saw that she and I got along well, he was really pleased. After a few months of those routine visits, while I was cleaning my in-laws' house as usual, Bianca said, There's a memorial service at the end of this month and people will gather. Just make sure you don't say anything unnecessary, all right? I smiled and replied, Of course, Bianca. But it seemed like Bianca wasn't completely satisfied with my response. The memorial service was for Carmen's grandfather on his death anniversary. He had passed away before I married Carmen, but he was known to be a gentle and kind person. He and my grandmother-in-law got along very well and used to travel together. Carmen told me they always held hands when they were out. Grandfather-in-law had died of cancer, and my grandmother-in-law had taken care of him devotedly, with no help from my parents-in-law. It's just unbelievable. There's a lot of preparation to do, so make sure you come early, all right? And I think you know what to do, Bianca added. Bianca said that, and I cheerfully responded, Yes, I'll act 30 minutes early. But she scolded me, Your voice is too loud, be quiet. I thought about throwing the TV remote at her but managed to hold back. You can't talk like that now, but just wait, get ready, she warned. I looked forward to the day of the memorial service, eagerly anticipating it. I was told to come 30 minutes early, but I arrived an hour early. Apparently, that was too much for Bianca, who came out of the entrance angry, saying, You're too early. There's such a thing as too much. Honestly, when I saw her face, she looked like a monster to me. I quickly cleaned the room and set up the tables. When I heard a cheerful male voice say, Good morning, as he approached the entrance, I saw the staff from a famous local steakhouse standing there. I had been there once with Carmen, and the meat was tender and delicious. But it's not something I can afford to do often. Ignoring me, Bianca eagerly engaged with the handsome staff, saying, Good morning. Nice weather today, isn't it? I could hear someone saying, Ooh, for the first time, and then I went back to my preparations. Hey, hurry up and bring in the food that arrived early, I heard Bianca's annoying voice. Resignedly, I headed to the kitchen, thinking yes. But there, I noticed something odd. How, Bianca, there's one meal missing. Is this a mistake? Should I call? When I said that, Bianca smirked and said, "It's not a mistake. I never prepared a portion for you." I was shocked. I never expected to be treated this way. Everyone's gathered today, and you, my son's wife, won't even have time to eat. How rude, she said. It felt like she was praising me, but I felt angry. Even though I didn't argue back, she seemed pleased and said, "You're just like a maid. Come on, say bow." Then she brought out leftover dog food from when they used to have a dog at my in-laws' house. I couldn't help but laugh at her humiliating gesture. I couldn't understand this woman at all. I thought maybe she was from another planet or something. I didn't want to talk to someone I couldn't communicate with, so I pretended to speak an alien language and shouted at her. For a moment, Bianca looked scared by my sudden behavior. "Are you crazy? Are you making fun of me?" she asked. "Yes, maybe I am. I've been putting up with this for a while now. I don't like living with someone as mean as you," I replied. "I don't know what you're upset about, but would you be happy if we got a divorce? No way. I won't allow it. I'd have to hire another maid, and that would be a waste of money," she interrupted, trying to grab me. "Stop it? How embarrassing," I said, turning around to see Carmen and my father-in-law Stanley, along with Stanley's brother and his wife, who had come from far away. Bianca didn't notice them because we were arguing, but it was time for Carmen and the others to arrive. I'm not sure how long they had been watching, but Bianca suddenly became quiet, maybe because Stanley stepped in or because she was shocked. Then the priest came to the house. The memorial service ended simply, and it was time to eat. But my grandmother-in-law stayed in her room, saying she wasn't feeling well. "I haven't had steak in a while, but it's really good here," Stanley said as I busied myself bringing drinks and such. "Allison, come and eat too. You don't need to do all this," my aunt-in-law said kindly. "Thank you, but it looks like there's no steak left for me." I pretended to be sad. When Cindy asked why, I said, "I can't really say. Please ask Bianca." Cindy glared at Bianca, who seemed scared by her look, and started saying something strange. "Oh, I ordered the wrong number of steaks." I offered my portion to Allison, but she said she didn't want it. I'm so lucky to have such a nice woman in the family. Bianca was sweating a lot, and her eyes were darting around. Cindy looked at me worriedly. Yes, that's right, behind Cindy. I could see Bianca's face completely at ease. That face was so funny, I struggled not to laugh. Bianca is always so nice. She tells me when I'm not polite. Today, instead of steak, she prepared this for me. I said and brought out the dog food Bianca had given me from the kitchen. Bianca looked scared at my unexpected move. "What's happening? What did you do to my wife?" Carmen asked, but Bianca stayed silent. Stanley spoke up. "Well, you know, when in Rome, do as the Romans do, right? Allison is part of the family now." Stanley started joking, and Carmen looked like he might grab him. Wanting to avoid any trouble, I decided to call my secret weapon Susan. Everyone was surprised by my loud call. Then from the back room, a cheerful voice answered, "Yes." Out came Susan, the grandmother-in-law. It turns out she's the Susan from pottery school. The day Bianca first invited me over, we were both shocked to see each other, never imagining that Susan would be the grandmother-in-law. We finished the chores at my in-laws' house together, laughing. The in-laws' house is a two-family house, and Susan's part was very neat. It was clear she wasn't sick, but Bianca never suspected. Since Bianca came home late at night, Susan and I went out to eat and for walks. I cherished the time I spent with Susan, which is why I was happy to visit my in-laws' home. Susan had asked me not to tell the family about our relationship. I was upset by Bianca's unfair words, but I knew it wouldn't last forever, so I endured it. Susan chose not to attend the memorial service because she didn't want to see the family's faces. She always prayed for my grandfather-in-law's happiness after his passing. "Huh? Mom, don't you have Alzheimer's?" Stanley asked, confused. "That's just something this woman misunderstood," Bianca said, shrinking away under everyone's glares. "What bothered me most was being excluded from the grandchildren's celebrations," Susan said, smiling at me. Bianca, not finding this funny, suddenly apologized. "I'm sorry, Allison. You've always been distant to me. I was frustrated, and that's why I played that prank today. I truly regret it, but if you had been kinder from the start, maybe I wouldn't have. I never wanted to go along with this act. Bianca, all the kind words you've said to me before, I thought they meant something." That's why I recorded them, I said, pulling out a hidden voice recorder. As we played it back, Bianca's face turned pale, and the others grew serious. Susan and I had planned to reveal everything on this day, regardless of the steak incident. After listening, Cindy started laughing. You talk about social manners, but you've never worked a day in your life. It seemed Bianca had never worked and had lived a life of leisure after the children grew up. Bianca started going out more, leading to constant arguments with Stanley. Stanley himself was apparently a habitual cheater who came home late every night. He would show up at school events for appearances, but otherwise had a fake relationship, according to what Carmen had told me. Carmen couldn't stand it either and left home as soon as he finished high school. That's why pack your bags and leave right now. This is the home my late husband and I cherished. I'll never let you come back. And you too, Stanley, Susan said, glaring at him. You've got another woman out there, don't you? Do whatever you want, worthless son. I'm cutting ties with you. Stanley left hastily, maybe feeling too exposed. And Carmen, I know you're busy with work, but visit once in a while. I understand if you don't want to, with such foolish parents, Susan told Carmen, looking a little sad. Then we left the house. As Carmen and I walked away, Bianca, looking furious, chased after me. Wait, clear up this misunderstanding. If I get kicked out, I'll be in trouble. I thought if that were the case, she shouldn't have mistreated me in the first place, but her words came too late. I don't get it. Why don't you work? You seem to know how to be a decent member of society, I said sarcastically as I got into the car. She was yelling something outside, but I ignored her. Let her regret her choices however she likes. After getting kicked out of my in-laws' house, Bianca showed up at Stanley's place where he was working alone. But as Susan predicted, Stanley was already living with his mistress, and Bianca was quickly left out. It turned out Bianca had been cheating too, with a married man. She got sued by his wife for damages. Since both our former in-laws had cheated, the damages kind of balanced out, but Bianca still had to pay. Stanley might have to pay less if his mistress's wife also sues him, but they're strangers to me now, and I don't care. They were a match in a weird way, despite their fake relationship. Carmen has no attachment to them and never wants to see them again. I feel the same. We decided to live in the in-laws' house with Susan. We got rid of all the furniture Bianca had picked out and changed the inside a lot, so it feels like a new home. Susan is surprisingly lively for her age, but I'm happy to take care of her if she needs it. Plus, next year, our family will be growing. I'm excited to have a happy life with my loved ones from now on. Help me, sister, my niece Jenny said with tears in her eyes as she gave me a picture. It showed my brother, Jenny's dad, with his friends at a bar. What's wrong, Jenny? I asked. Before she could answer, my serious sister-in-law showed up. What are you two doing? She asked sternly, taking Jenny away. Alone now, I looked at the back of the picture and saw a message from my brother. It said, if something happens to me, please take care of my daughter. My name is Alice. I'm a 32-year-old working in my family's construction company office. My older brother, who's 10 years older than me, was always seen as the one who would run the business someday. He's a hard worker, but he never seemed keen on taking over. Even though everyone, including me, thought he would, he often said, I enjoy carpentry, but I don't want to run the business. It became his mantra, repeated over and over. Then one day, he dropped a bombshell. I found someone I want to marry, he announced, introducing us to Maggie. She was lively and quickly became part of our family even though she didn't live with us. I'm getting married and moving out, he declared. But what about the business? I asked. You know you're expected to take over, right? He sighed, patting my head gently. I don't want to cause you any trouble with Dad. We don't see eye to eye, he explained. True to his word, he married soon after and moved out. But he always stayed in touch, chatting with me about everyday stuff. Guess what? Maggie made a delicious dinner tonight. She's a dietitian, so she keeps an eye on my high blood pressure, he'd say. I'd tease him, saying, you never get tired of bragging about her, do you? But seeing him happy was all that mattered to me. A few years after my brother got married, his daughter Jenny was born. After that, we started seeing them more often. They looked really happy, and Jenny was growing up well-loved by both her parents. When Jenny turned 10, there were talks in the family about patching things up with my brother. We hoped we could laugh together like we used to, but that hope didn't come true. One day while I was at work, I got a rare call from my sister-in-law. It wasn't unusual to hear from my brother, but it was strange to hear from her. Worried, I answered the phone right away. "Hey, sister-in-law." "Oh, Alice, what's going on? It's not often I hear from you. Calm down and listen. Your brother Jake had an accident at work. He fell from scaffolding because of the rain." The news hit me hard. I felt like time stopped. I called our parents, who were also at work, and we rushed to the hospital in the pouring rain. When we entered the hospital room, my brother looked so pale. Seeing him like that made the reality of the phone call sink in, and I collapsed to the floor. "Bro," I managed to say weakly, surprised by how feeble my voice sounded, and sadness washed over me. Beside the bed, my brother's wife was crying loudly, like the main character in a sad story. Her crying was so intense that it made me hold back my tears and just stare at her, feeling uneasy about her behavior. Jenny, standing next to her, looked down, her face pale, not crying but trembling as if she were scared of something. "Jenny, are you okay?" She didn't seem able to answer, still in shock from her father's death. After the wake for my brother at our home, as the relatives were grieving deeply, I found myself quietly crying in a secluded corner of the porch. The photo in the memorial portrait looked recent. My brother seemed a bit tired, but peaceful. I wondered if he had been happy. As I pondered this, I thought of Jenny. The last time we spoke, my brother, who adored his daughter, happily shared how he often took her to amusement parks and zoos. Jenny must be having a hard time after losing her dad. Thinking about her, tears filled my eyes again. But then I heard a familiar voice calling out to me. "Sis." It was Jenny, tears welling in her eyes. "Jenny, what's the matter?" I asked, wiping away my own tears, trying to stay calm. "Sis, I need your help. I'm scared. I think something bad might happen to me next." Before I could ask her to explain, she handed me something, nervously biting her lip. "Dad told me that if anything happened, I should give this to Alice," she said, repeating what our brother had told her. Jenny handed me a slightly worn brown envelope, which she had probably been holding onto for a while. "It's actually..." Just then, a cold voice interrupted us from behind, saying, "What are you doing?" I turned around to see my brother's wife, Maggie, looking stern. "I've been looking for you, Mama," Jenny said nervously. Maggie grabbed Jenny's arm and quickly took her away before I could say anything. Maggie had always been friendly and kind, but she seemed different now. It's understandable, given her husband's recent passing, but Jenny's behavior was also odd. Alone again, I opened the envelope and found an ordinary photograph inside. It looked like it was taken at a social event, with my brother smiling alongside some colleagues. I decided to flip the photo over. On the back, my brother's slightly angular handwriting read, "If anything happens to me, I want you to protect my daughter." I was shocked, speechless, just staring in surprise. I realized Jenny was asking for help, and this photo might be connected. So I decided to call a friend who was a police officer and arranged to meet him the next day. Usually the funeral would have been the day after the wake, but the crematorium wasn't available due to a certain day of the week, so we had an extra day. This gave me time to dig deeper into my brother's death. The next morning, when I got to our meeting spot, he was already there, waiting for me. "Sorry for calling you out of the blue." "Don't worry about it. I was off duty anyway. What's going on?" "Well, it's just..." I started to explain the situation to my friend, and he listened carefully. From a police standpoint, we can't take action based on just this evidence." "I understand. I wish I could do more. But remember, I'm here if you need to talk." "Yeah, thanks. Just talking it through helps me think." Even after saying goodbye to my friend, I couldn't stop thinking about the photo Jenny gave me. No matter how many times I looked at it, the message from my brother remained a puzzle. What else could I do to uncover a clue? The message alone didn't give me much to go on. I realized that talking to Jenny directly might be risky with my sister-in-law around. Then, an idea struck me. Maybe I could find something in my brother's belongings. Unable to sit still, I hurried to my sister-in-law's house. "I'm sorry to bother you during this difficult time. I just wanted to check on you and Jenny," I said as she answered the door. "Thank you for coming. Jenny's in her room, but she's not feeling too good since her dad passed," she replied, leading me to the living room. Despite her usual neatness, the house felt somber today. I don't see any of my brother's stuff here, and even a family photo that was here last time. There was no sign that my brother had ever been there. Determined to find something of his, I looked around the room. Maggie brought me some tea and homemade pickles. What caught my eye was a light purple bracelet similar to a rosary on Maggie's wrist. It didn't seem like something she or my brother would wear, and it made me uneasy as I thanked her for the tea and tasted the pickles. "These pickles are really salty, aren't they?" I remarked, quickly drinking my tea to wash down the extreme saltiness. But Maggie just tilted her head, saying, "Really? I don't think so." Maggie, a dietitian, usually made delicious and healthy meals that my brother loved. It was odd for her to make something so salty, especially knowing my brother's high blood pressure. Since I arrived, I've been feeling uneasy at Maggie's house, and I started worrying about Jenny. "I'd like to talk to Jenny. She's in her room, right?" Just as I stood up to go to her room. "No, you can't see her." "What? Why?" "I'm sorry, but you need to leave. I'm busy getting ready for the funeral," Maggie said firmly, grabbing my wrist and pushing me out into the hallway, then out of the house. Feeling frustrated after finding no clues, I looked up at the sky, wondering what to do next. Suddenly, Jenny appeared at a second-floor window. She gestured for me to be quiet and threw something at me. It was a small key wrapped in cute memo paper, the shed key. "Hide it under the potted plant after you use it," the note read. I gave Jenny a thumbs up, and she nodded before gently closing the window. To avoid my sister-in-law, I went to the backyard and used the key to open the shed. Inside, I found my brother's belongings, including a diary. Jake had been diligent about recording his daily life in a diary since he lived at home. As I read through it, I couldn't believe what I found. The food had become too salty, and even when he mentioned it, Maggie dismissed it, saying, "Trust me, I'm a dietitian," and he couldn't get her to take it seriously. His health had been declining because of it. Plus, he explained why he left that photo. The next day, a crowd gathered at the funeral, including relatives and Jake's colleagues. When Maggie took the microphone to speak, I stood up and interrupted her. "I need to say something," I announced. "Alice, what's going on?" Maggie looked surprised as I walked to the front of the room, ignoring her. "Jake didn't die by accident." My words caused a commotion in the hall, and Maggie's expression turned stern. "What are you saying?" "My husband slipped and fell off the scaffold at work," Maggie protested. "I showed everyone Jake's diary. It's all written here." My sister-in-law, who is usually a good cook, started making heavily seasoned dishes, and Jake's health started to decline. "Isn't it strange, Maggie? Serving salty food to Jake, who has high blood pressure, and insisting he eats it all." "I don't know what you're talking about. I always took care with his meals," Maggie insisted, trying to play innocent. Ignoring her, I presented another piece of evidence. "This is a photo Jake left for me. At first, I didn't understand its significance, but when I visited your house yesterday, it became clear. The person in this photo is wearing a bracelet that matches the light purple one you're wearing." As I pointed to the person, everyone's attention shifted there. "Mr. Johnson, you and Maggie were having an affair, weren't you? Even though you were a colleague Jake trusted, why betray him like this?" As murmurs filled the hall, Maggie glared at me while the man looked pale and nervous. Mr. Johnson was a familiar face to me as well. He had been a good friend of Jake's since they graduated from high school and started working together. He had visited our house many times, and I had seen him wearing the same bracelet as Maggie's when he wiped sweat from his forehead. I'm sure Jake was struggling a lot, knowing that the colleague he trusted was having an affair with his wife, and that he might even be in danger. That's why he couldn't tell me directly, and leaving this photo was his way of trying to communicate. I said to Mr. Johnson, holding back tears. He broke down crying and held his head in his hands. "What? A diary and a bracelet can't prove an affair or that I killed my husband," Maggie protested, getting defensive. But I was prepared and continued with the evidence from the diary. "There's more. Jake checked your phone, Maggie, and found emails between you and Mr. Johnson. It seems you wrote, 'Jake is in the way of us being together. We need to get rid of him.' That's not true. Whether it's a lie or not, we can easily find out by investigating, right?" I challenge. "At first, it seemed like you were planning to take advantage of my brother's high blood pressure to harm him through his meals. But that would take too long. So driven by your desire to get married as soon as possible, you approached Mr. Johnson to eliminate my brother in a workplace accident, didn't you? You planned to push him from a height on a rainy day. And if anyone asked, You just say he slipped. I never suggested such a thing. He's the one who brought it up. Maggie tried to deflect blame onto Mr. Johnson, pointing at him. He shook his head vigorously, denying it. Mr. Johnson, it was raining on the day my brother died, wasn't it? I asked. He nodded slightly. Usually work would be stopped on a rainy day, so why wasn't it? It was only drizzling and we had a deadline, so he suggested we continue with the work. I saw it as an opportunity, Mr. Johnson explained. My brother considered you his best friend and trusted you until the end. You know that, I said, addressing Mr. Johnson. There was a collective intake of breath as he bowed deeply towards Jenny, my brother's only daughter. I was led astray by her, and I did something terrible. I'm truly sorry, Mr. Johnson continued to apologize through tears. Jenny looked at him with sadness in her eyes. Meanwhile, Maggie kept denying any involvement. Even at this point, you'll hand over the incriminating emails to the police, right? I asked, and when Mr. Johnson offered his phone, Maggie seemed to finally give up. Then, a police officer friend who had attended my brother's funeral arrested the two of them and took them away. It was a relief to see them finally caught. Afterward, Maggie and Mr. Johnson received long prison sentences. Thanks to the lawyer I hired, Jenny received financial support from a program called the Victims' Compensation Program, designed to help families of victims recover. Jenny was deeply affected by the incident and struggled for a while, but I adopted her as my own, and she's slowly starting to smile again. I've decided to give her all the love I can in place of my brother. Hi, I'm Jacob. I'm really nervous today because I'm about to do something very important. I'm going to Sarah's house to ask her to marry me. Sarah and I were classmates when we were younger, and we started dating again after meeting at a school reunion 6 months ago. We're both older now, in our 30s, and we've been talking about our future a lot. Sarah has been talking about getting married, and although it made me a bit nervous, I also thought it might be a good idea, so we decided to get married. I feel bad that I didn't propose to Sarah in a proper way. We decided to get married quickly without much planning. Just a few days ago, we finally decided that I would ask her formally at her house. I haven't met Sarah's parents since we started dating, but I remember seeing her dad once when we were in middle school, probably at a parent-teacher meeting or a school event. He seemed serious and focused on education, which impressed me. My own dad passed away when I was young, and he was more laid back. So seeing Sarah's dad being so involved stuck with me. He seemed like a serious person. I'm worried about what Sarah's dad will think when he learns we decided to get married so quickly and without a proper proposal. He might think our relationship of only 6 months is too short. The more I think about it, the more nervous I get. I had a hard time sleeping last night, and this morning I struggled to eat breakfast. My mom noticed and looked concerned. I told her I was going to introduce her to my girlfriend soon, but I didn't mention it's Sarah yet. I want to surprise her. My parents were also classmates in middle school, so I think she'll be happy to hear that my future wife is also a classmate. After my dad passed away, my family faced financial struggles, and I had to start working right after finishing middle school. My mom really helped me stay on track during that tough time. She's always positive, never speaks badly about others, and keeps a hopeful attitude, which has rubbed off on me. She doesn't ask much about my love life, probably because she knows I'm busy, but I want to reassure her. That's why I need today's meeting to go well. I'm feeling really nervous, like I might get a stomach ulcer. But seeing how anxious I am, my mom gave me a reassuring pat on the back and said, "You've got this, son." She's right. I can't afford to be weak now. I need to gather my courage. With that in mind, I made my way to Sarah's house. When I got there, Sarah greeted me at the door and welcomed me inside. "Come on in, my parents are waiting," Sarah said, which made me feel really nervous. When I stepped into the living room, Sarah's parents were sitting on the couch, smiling at me. "We're glad you're here. We've been waiting," they said warmly, and suddenly I felt a wave of relief wash over me. It wasn't as intimidating as I had feared. They seemed friendly and welcoming, and I started to think this meeting might turn out okay. After introducing myself, Sarah's mom brought out some tea. "Thank you," I said gratefully. "I didn't know you went to middle school with Sarah," I exclaimed, surprised. "Were you ever in the same class as her?" she inquired. I explained that we hadn't shared a class, but Sarah had approached me at the school reunion. "Oh, I understand. But I should remember you if you were a top student, even from a different class. she pondered, resting her hand on her cheek, looking puzzled. Before I could respond, Sarah interjected with a laugh. Jacob wasn't exactly a star student, was he? Always pretty average, right? I wish Sarah hadn't been so blunt, but it was too late. I glanced at Sarah's mom and saw her looking at me with an unreadable expression. Sarah's comment changed the mood in the room. What was once a pleasant atmosphere turned heavy and silent. After an awkward pause, Sarah's dad spoke up. "Which college did you attend?" "I never went to college. In fact, I didn't even finish high school. I had started working right after middle school." I was planning to be honest about my past when suddenly, a cup of tea flew towards me before I could finish my sentence. At the same time, there was a shout. "Don't lie to me. Sarah told me you were a CEO, but you're just a dropout who's been working since middle school. How can I trust someone like you to run a company? You're just riding on the startup trend and you'll fail soon, mark my words." Sarah's dad glared at me, shocked. He grabbed my collar and demanded, "What's your real motive? Are you trying to take advantage of me because I'm an executive at a big company?" I tried desperately to explain, but he wouldn't listen. "I can't trust someone who didn't finish high school." "You don't belong here. Get out," he yelled, pushing me away and throwing a teacup at me. I couldn't even clear up the misunderstanding or calm him down. He kicked me and I fell to the ground. Sarah and her mom just watched, not intervening. Then everything went black. He flipped the dining table and I tried to dodge, but it hit my foot. The pain was intense and I couldn't help but groan. "Stop overreacting. It can't hurt that much," Sarah's dad scoffed. Even Sarah joined in, saying, "You're so weak for a man. This is pathetic." I knew I had to get out of there. Despite the pain in my foot, I managed to leave Sarah's house. When I got home, my mom, who had been eagerly waiting for me, rushed out to greet me. Seeing her, I felt so relieved that I passed out. "Jacob, thank goodness you're awake." My mom's worried face greeted me as I opened my eyes, tears welling up in her eyes. As I came to, memories of what happened at Sarah's house flooded back. I was supposed to make her happy, but instead, I ended up causing her worry and sadness. "I'm sorry, Mom. I don't think I can introduce you to my girlfriend after all," I confessed. "Don't worry about it, Jacob. I'm just glad you're awake," my mom reassured me. "I was really surprised when you collapsed in front of me. You slept for a full day due to the shock. According to the doctor, it seems like you broke a bone in your toe. You'll be discharged from a hospital soon, but it'll take about a month to heal. They also found bruises all over your body." Prompted by my mom's encouragement, I began to recount what had happened that day. As soon as I mentioned Sarah's last name, I noticed a change in my mom's expression. "Johnson, you don't mean..." Her face turned pale. It dawned on me that when I was in junior high, Sarah's dad had criticized my mom, saying that having a single parent's child around was a bad influence on his daughter. My dad wasn't around during my junior high years, and my mom, who was working hard every day, could only attend school events once in those 3 years. She was hurt deeply by what Sarah's dad said to her on that occasion. She never spoke about it or showed any signs of being affected by it. But now, seeing my mom's frustrated expression, saying, "I can't believe the person who said such a thing hurt my son," my anger surged. It wasn't just about him looking down on me for only finishing junior high, but he had also hurt my mom in the past. At that moment, I resolved to confront them, father and daughter. The next day, I made my way to Sarah's house again. I had let her know beforehand, but Sarah didn't seem to feel guilty about what happened. Instead, she blamed me for the lack of communication during the day I was unconscious. That's just how she was. It made me feel pathetic to think that the person I planned to marry could act like that. But at the same time, I realized it was a good thing to find out before getting married. When I arrived at Sarah's house, both her parents were waiting outside. "Daring to come back here? Don't you dare set foot in this house again." Sarah's dad was already being aggressive. He didn't even acknowledge that I was on crutches with a cast on my left foot. "I have no intention of coming back inside. I've decided to file a complaint, so I came to inform you today," I declared. My words seemed to catch them off guard, and they exchanged looks before bursting into laughter. "Wait, you're serious about filing a complaint? You weren't seriously hurt. It's ridiculous to sue your fiancé's dad," Sarah argued. I informed her that the engagement was off. I thought they might be surprised or upset when I mentioned the complaint and the breakup, but they didn't seem to care. Don't give up just because the meeting didn't go well. If you apologize, Jacob, I'll ask my dad to give you another chance, Sarah said arrogantly. Why should I apologize? I felt my anger rising and I said firmly, I have nothing to apologize for. I'm serious about both ending the engagement and filing the complaint. Then Sarah, trying to play the tragic hero, said, my father could easily squash something like a police report. He could even make this broken engagement disappear if it happened now. I couldn't believe her audacity. How dare she act so superior? Then even Sarah's dad joined in, saying, Sarah, we're better off without a man like this. Go ahead, file a police report if you want. I doubt you have enough evidence for it to mean anything anyway, he sneered, laughing mockingly. Like father, like daughter. That phrase suddenly felt very fitting. Are you sure about that? I decided to disrupt their laughter. You have no proof that I did anything, so the police can't do anything. You thought I'd back down if you mentioned a police report, didn't you, fool? You should know better than to think that would scare me, I said, hands on hips. Sarah's father laughed confidently. That's when I decided to reveal the reality of the situation. Actually, that's the evidence. Apparently not understanding what I meant, the three of them just stared at me in disbelief. I pulled out my phone and played a recording. I had been recording everything since before I arrived. I needed evidence that my injuries were caused by them. No matter how high up they were in a big corporation, they couldn't escape an assault charge when the evidence was clear. Instead of apologizing, Sarah's father started yelling at me. How dare you? Go ahead, file your report. There's no way I'm letting you marry Sarah. Sarah's mom, who had been quiet until now, began to panic. We can still forgive him if we do it now, right, honey? She pleaded. No need. As I said earlier, the engagement is off and I will file a report. I don't want to marry someone who doesn't care when their fiancé is injured and who joins their parents in making fun of me, I declared. When I said that, Sarah, who had been looking down on me until just now, started to panic. You're lying, Jacob. You said you wanted to marry me, you liar. Sarah's dad then erupted, you low-educated punk. I'll never forgive you, and lunged at me. His punch caught me off guard, knocking me to the ground. Sarah's mom desperately tried to stop her husband from continuing to attack me while I was down. Honey, this is bad. We don't know who might be watching, she pleaded, but Sarah's dad didn't stop. You're just a figurehead CEO. You used that to lure Sarah, and now you're going to sue me. I'll sue you for fraud. Then I'll have to cancel our $5 million order with your company, he threatened. I had been contemplating it for a while, and I had made up my mind. I was going to corner this man as much as possible. What are you talking about, $5 million? There's no way you can make a deal like that. Sarah's father scoffed, getting off me and calling me an idiot. It was time to show him reality. I called my mother. What are you going to achieve by calling your mother? Sarah told me mockingly, you only have one parent. How sad that you only have your mother to help you in times like this. It really does make a difference not having a father, huh? Sarah's father, unaware of what was coming, continued to look down on me. It was almost comical. About 10 minutes later, the moment I had been waiting for arrived. Sarah's father's phone started ringing. He said it was from his company and answered the call. At first he spoke confidently, but his speech gradually became sluggish, and his face turned pale. As soon as he ended the call, he glared at me. What the hell have you done? He demanded. I did exactly what I said earlier. I canceled the order. I didn't want to do business with a company that looks down on people for their education level or family background, I explained calmly. Sarah's father still seemed skeptical. There's no way someone with your low education level could do that. Do you have connections or something? He scoffed, continuing to belittle me for my limited education. I lost all interest in continuing the conversation. Believe what you want. Goodbye, I said and turned to leave. Wait a minute. Sarah's father tried to chase after me, shouting, but he was stopped by Sarah and her mother, demanding, what's this about $5 million? What was that phone call about? He was stuck. It was true that I only finished middle school, and it could be said that I just caught the startup wave. But with the money I saved with my mother, I started a successful business that traded with major companies. Now I had my mother, who was the vice president of my company, contact Sarah's father's company. I didn't want to mix personal matters with work, but I had reached my limit. When I got home and saw my mother's usual cheerful face, I felt guilty for bringing my personal matters into it. I felt like my time as a CEO was over, and I regretted making my mother take on such an unpleasant role. "Sorry, Mom, for making you make that unpleasant call," I apologized. But instead of being upset, my mother was smiling. When I asked her why, she said, "I came up with a good idea and decided on my own, without consulting you, the CEO." It turns out, when my mother called the president of the other company, she told them what Sarah's father had done to me. She suggested that if Sarah's father was fired, the cancellation of the order could be revoked. By the time I got home, the president of the other company had called to say that Sarah's father had indeed been fired. True to her word, my mother continued the order. I didn't mind making the call, and we didn't have to search for another supplier. We simply removed a toxic individual who only cared about status and insulted others. With that, my mother encouraged me as if there was nothing to worry about. Afterwards, I received numerous calls and emails from Sarah, pressuring me to marry her, so I blocked her number. According to a story I heard from a middle school classmate, after this incident, Sarah found out I was the CEO and approached me at the reunion. She likely wanted to be the CEO's wife and began dating me, discussing marriage. Sarah's father was arrested because I filed a complaint. Sarah's mother, who had been boasting about her husband's job at a major company, couldn't bear the neighborhood's judgment upon learning he was arrested. She seemed to have disappeared somewhere, leaving Sarah behind. It was a fitting end for a mother and daughter who were solely concerned about their image. I maintained our contract with the company where Sarah's father had worked, and we now have a good relationship. There are discussions about new projects, and it seems like my days will remain busy but fulfilling for a while. I really want some chocolate cake, but I'm stuck in bed feeling awful. Suddenly, my mother-in-law Grace starts yelling at me to get her a cake right now. I couldn't take it anymore and snapped at her. I told her to get her own cake because I only have a month left to live. My name is Olivia, and I'm 28 years old. I met my husband David through a friend, and we got married after dating for 3 years. We don't have kids yet, but we're enjoying our time together. David's family owns a small factory with about 30 workers. They're doing pretty well in their area. The company was started by David's late dad and has grown thanks to everyone's hard work. Now David's sister, Sophia, is in charge of the company. She's not married, but she's really good at running the business. David thinks she got her skills from Mom because they both have great communication abilities. Sophia is really nice and easy to talk to, even when we first met. Sophia, my sister-in-law, greeted me warmly, calling me cute and expressing her happiness to have me as a sister. As someone who only had brothers, it felt nice to gain a sister. However, despite this pleasant start, there's a problem with my mother-in-law. Our company has coffee breaks at 10 o'clock a.m. and 3 o'clock p.m. Times I dread. Here's why. Whenever I'm asked to get Mom's coffee, it instantly ruins my mood. Our family home is next to the factory, and after my father-in-law passed away, my mother-in-law chose to retire and stay home. She seems to look forward to these coffee breaks, always saying, "I've been waiting for you, Olivia." I wanted to talk to Sophia once, but she gave me a disappointed look. Naturally, she wasn't in a good mood, and before leaving with a forced smile, she said, "Hey, I have something to say to you. So sit here," and then she complains to me until the break is over. She often comments about why we haven't had kids yet, saying it's not something we can control. If I stay quiet, she gets even more irritated. Why such a gloomy face? I wonder why David chose someone like you. Plus, even your parents, who knows how long you'll live. The sooner the better, she said that with a sigh. Hearing her talk like that, especially about my parents, really hurts. And there's a reason for that. When David and I decided to get married and met his family, this happened. "What, you don't have parents?" My mother-in-law looked shocked when I told her. It's not like I never had parents. My mom passed away from cancer when I was 10, and my dad died of a heart attack when I was 20. My memories of my mom are fuzzy, but my dad raised my brother and me all by himself. I deeply regret that he passed away before I could repay his kindness. When people hear about my situation, they usually look at me with pity and say, "You must have had a hard time." But my mother-in-law reacted differently. "So you might not live long either, huh?" She actually said that while I was stunned by her response. It was so rude and insensitive. My husband David told me that despite my shock, my mother-in-law kept complaining, insisting it was an important issue. Should I rethink this marriage? Just as I was considering that, Sophia, who had been quiet until then, suddenly slammed her hand on the table and said, "What are you talking about?" She said it so quietly that everyone in the room froze. Then my mother-in-law said, "Right, Sophia, you agree with me, don't you?" That's what she said. Sophia's response was icy. "What?" I told Mom, "David chose Olivia himself, and she's wonderful. Why can't you support that?" She said this to my mother-in-law with a cold stare. My mother-in-law, who adored her daughter, seemed shocked by Sophia's words. After that, she stopped making mean comments except when we were alone. Even during the coffee breaks, she looked disappointed when I brought her coffee instead of Sophia. Luckily, David and I rented a room near his family home, so I only had to endure her complaints during those 10-minute coffee breaks. I'm relieved we don't live together. But my peace was suddenly shattered that year. A record-breaking hurricane brought a lot of misfortune my way. "Olivia, something terrible has happened." I'd never heard David sound so panicked. I hurried to the living room and found it in chaos. "What's going on?" Our ceiling was leaking badly because of the hurricane. It wasn't just our room, the owner told us it was happening in other rooms too. It seemed impossible to fix while staying there, so we needed to find somewhere else to live. Sophia suggested cheerfully, "Why worry? Just stay with us. Your commute will be 30 seconds. She said this innocently, so we ended up staying with David's family for a while. "Welcome home, David. It must have been tough, but Mom is happy we can live together again." My mother-in-law greeted us warmly, but David mostly ignored her, acting like a rebellious teenager. Then she said, "Oh, Olivia, you're here too. I didn't notice because you're so quiet. Smile more." My husband looked frustrated, and all I could do was force a smile, knowing we'd be staying there for a while. After moving in, I noticed something odd. The first time was during dinner on our first night. Wanting to show my appreciation, I cooked bread, soup, and steak. It wasn't fancy, but my mother-in-law and sister-in-law said it was delicious and finished it all. I felt genuinely relieved. After a while, my mother-in-law suddenly stood up and brought a container from the fridge, humming a tune. She opened it and piled a ton of its contents onto her steak. Mom, you're still eating that stuff." My husband, sitting next to me, looked disgusted. Sophia, my sister-in-law, rolled her eyes and said she won't stop no matter how many times I tell her. "I've given up." Then she burst into laughter. At first, I couldn't tell what was on top of the steak, but upon closer inspection, I realized it was jam. While it's not uncommon to have sweet sauces on meat, adding jam to a seasoned steak seemed bizarre. When you eat something salty, you crave something sweet, right? "That's why," she said, looking quite pleased with herself. Honestly, it gave me heartburn just watching her. For the record, I'm not a fan of sweet sauces on meat. "Come on, Olivia, why don't you try it? It's delicious," my mother-in-law said, turning to me. For the first time, I didn't want to eat it, but I forced a smile. Apparently, that wasn't the reaction she was hoping for. "I'm recommending it for a reason. You might live longer if you follow my example." With that parting shot, she retreated to her room, leaving me speechless. My husband and sister-in-law apologized, saying, Sorry, Mom's at it again with her nonsense." Apparently, my mother-in-law has a serious sweet tooth and doesn't feel her day is complete without eating cake. Surprisingly, her annual health checkups always come back normal. Come to think of it, she's always eating cake during our 3:00 p.m. coffee breaks. I remembered that I like cake too, but having it every day would be boring. Plus, what about blood sugar levels? I've always been careful about my health, especially since my parents had short lifespans. So my mother-in-law's jam steak was quite surprising. Wait till Sophia buy cake every day. Caught off guard, Sophia admitted, "Yeah, she makes me go buy it. She says it's embarrassing for her to do it herself." Thanks to that, I've become good friends with all the local cake shops, Sophia said, laughing. My husband David chimed in, "Sophia, this isn't a laughing matter. Mom's getting older. She needs to start caring about her health. I've always left it to Sophia to deal with Mom, and I feel bad about it." With that, he looked frustrated. "Well, I think you guys will have to help out more from now on," Sophia said cheerfully, and I prepared myself for more interactions with my mother-in-law. Living with my in-laws made my commute much shorter. so I took the lead in doing household chores before and after work. I tried to talk to my mother-in-law, but she often ignored me or gave me the cold shoulder. Despite that, she never missed a chance to complain about the kids during our coffee breaks. Since moving here, I've been having more rough days. It's probably the stress. My mood was low and my husband noticed. He offered several times to go to the doctor with me. "Let's move out and stay at a hotel for a while," he suggested, but I turned it down because it felt like a waste of money, and the nearest hotel was still a bit far. Then the worst news came, a week-long business trip. I was stunned when my husband told me. The reason for my dread? Sophia, my sister-in-law, would also be going, meaning I'd be alone with my mother-in-law. Yeah, I said it. My husband offered to take me with him, but I thought, it's just a week. I hope I can manage, especially since I still wasn't feeling well. On the day they left, Sophia sent me a mother-in-law survival guide to my phone. "If anything happens, just give her cake and you'll be fine." I couldn't help but laugh. The guide included local cake shops and my mother-in-law's favorite cakes from each. For someone like me who was gearing up for a tough week, this information was a lifesaver. In a week, our home renovations would be done, and we could move back. I thought optimistically, I could handle this, but that hope faded on the first night. When I returned from work, my mother-in-law was blocking the entrance. "You know why I'm angry, don't you?" she snapped. "No, I don't. I'm not psychic," I replied, losing patience. "You missed both the 10 o'clock a.m. and 3 o'clock p.m. coffee breaks today." Her words caught me off guard. Indeed, with my husband and Sophia away and end-of-month tasks piling up, I'd completely forgotten about my mother-in-law's coffee breaks, and I never had a coffee break myself. I thought she'd understand since she used to work, but she yelled at me the moment we were alone. "You start this harassment, you wicked woman," she said with an angry look. I felt a huge disconnect. Why was I being yelled at like this? Did I deserve to be called wicked? Suppressing my anger, I thought, it's just a few more days, and said, "I did buy cake during my lunch break. It's in the office fridge. Sorry I didn't bring it here." Her face instantly changed from angry to smiling. "Let's forget about today. Don't forget tomorrow, okay?" she said cheerfully and went back to her room. From then on, I made sure never to forget the coffee breaks, knowing how much trouble it would cause if I upset my mother-in-law. On the day my husband and Sophia were supposed to return, I felt incredibly stressed. I was hit with nausea, headaches, and a loss of appetite. I took the day off and went to the hospital. "It's pretty serious. Can your family come right away?" I couldn't stop crying at the doctor's words. I was told I have cancer and at most 6 months, maybe even just 1 month, to live. I returned home, my face stained with tears, my body trembling, and collapsed onto the bed. The door burst open. "What are you doing, skipping work? Sophie and David are working hard, and you're slacking off?" Her yelling worsened my headache. I didn't have the energy to respond, so I just said, "I'm not feeling well," and closed my eyes. Mother-in-law didn't seem to care. She didn't want to leave the room and kept complaining to me. She said things like, "That's why you can't have kids, and who knows if you'll live long." I just stayed silent, pretending to be asleep. Then suddenly, she asked about today's coffee break. Is she really this insensitive? I thought, opening my eyes to see her standing over me. "Grace, I'm sorry. I'm not feeling well enough to go shopping today. Could you please?" She cut me off. "I don't care. I want chocolate cake now." "Go buy it. You're probably faking it," she screamed at me louder than ever. My frustration exploded at the woman in front of me, who was acting selfishly like a child. "Shut up. Listen to me. I have 1 month to live. Go buy your own damn cake, you idiot." My words seemed to shock my mother-in-law, who stared at me wide-eyed. Then, from behind her, "Mom, what are you doing? And Olivia, what do you mean by 1 more month?" My husband, looking pale, and my sister-in-law, equally concerned, were standing there. "Oh, weren't you supposed to come back tomorrow?" Ignoring the visibly shaken mother-in-law, my husband came to my side. I felt so relieved by his action that I burst into tears. "I can't take it anymore. The doctor says it might be cancer, and I'm not feeling well, but you keep nagging me to go buy cake. Enough is enough. Stop bothering me about the kids too. Just leave me alone, you idiot." I let out all my resentment towards my mother-in-law while crying. My husband and sister-in-law looked at her with cold eyes. Sending a sick person to buy cake, Are you stupid? Sophia, who's usually all smiles, had a face I'd never seen before, a terrifying one. You've been making snide remarks about the kids. Look, I didn't say anything because it's a private matter, but the reason we can't have kids is me. My husband raised his voice as he said this. In reality, about a year after we got married, we consulted a doctor because we were having trouble conceiving. The tests showed that I was fine, but my husband's numbers were low. He felt really down about it and kept apologizing to me with a sad face. I didn't want to make him feel that way, so I avoided talking about kids as much as possible. I did want children, but I thought life with just my husband was enough. I never considered leaving him because we couldn't have kids. I didn't tell my mother-in-law because I knew she'd start nagging. She listened to my husband's words with a face like her soul had been sucked out. Just then, my cell phone rang. The caller ID showed it was the hospital. Hello, yes, right now. My husband just got home. Okay, understood. The doctor who had called earlier sounded urgent, asking us to come right away. Am I really that sick? I started to cry from the anxiety. It's okay, Olivia. Can you stand? I'm with you. My husband, who also looked like he was about to cry, and I rushed to the hospital. As we were leaving, I caught a glimpse of my mother-in-law getting a stern lecture from Sophia. When we arrived at the hospital, we were immediately ushered into a room where the doctor and even the hospital director were waiting to offer us a deep apology. It was a misdiagnosis. According to the doctor, they had mixed up my medical records with another patient who had the same name and birth date as me. I couldn't believe such a thing could happen, but the doctor did look extremely worn out. This incident was later covered in a local news segment, and the hospital vowed to review its working conditions. We were then referred to another hospital. When we returned to my in-laws' house, my mother-in-law seemed to have been scolded by Sophia and was shrinking in her seat. Sophia later told me she was worried that her newlywed son might lose his wife and be heartbroken. It might be love turned inside out, but it was a real hassle seeing our tear-streaked faces. Even my mother-in-law broke down. Did I really do something that bad? She started crying. So what about Olivia? Sophia asked with a concerned look. I'm pregnant, I said, tears of joy filling my eyes. My husband was also shedding tears of happiness beside me. We immediately went to the maternity hospital as advised. It's still early, but yes, you're pregnant. We can confirm the heartbeat. Hearing that, we both burst into tears, even though we were in a hospital. Sophia also cried, saying, I'm so glad, so very glad. As for what happened next, Sophia got engaged to her long-term boyfriend and moved to another state with him after quitting her job. We had heard about this beforehand, so it wasn't a surprise. My husband, who was taking over as the new CEO, seemed to have his hands full with client visits. The business trip, by the way, was for that reason. He told me later that he was able to come home a day early because it ended sooner than expected. Mother-in-law seemed to know nothing about it. What? Getting married, quitting her job, and moving to another state. She was shocked. Sophia told her, Yeah, I told you. Remember? Well, it doesn't matter. It's settled. Mother-in-law was in a daze, and we all laughed. We returned home to find our leaky roof repaired and our room looking brand new. We cheered in delight. Things remained awkward with mother-in-law. My husband was angrier than I was and said he never wanted to see her again. But mother-in-law started showing up occasionally during our coffee breaks, holding not cake but small snacks like biscuits. She had stopped the daily cakes and jammed steaks, apparently trying to be more health conscious now that she knew a grandchild was on the way. Employees who had worked there since my father-in-law was CEO seemed happy to see mother-in-law. So I realized she wasn't inherently a bad person. Our conversations gradually increased and she stopped complaining. When our daughter Emma was born, mother-in-law transformed. She started doing things like buying diapers and leaving side dishes for dinner, saying, Feel free to eat. You're always working so hard. Even when she knew I was home, she'd send a message and leave without ringing the doorbell. The side dishes were in a cooler, and I appreciated her thoughtfulness. I felt I could get along with this version of mother-in-law. What really convinced me was when Emma was born. Mother-in-law took my hand and said, Thank you, Olivia. Really, thank you. Seeing her tears, I knew she was sincere. Sophia also seems to be doing well and recently announced her pregnancy. It seems like it won't be long before we all gather at the in-laws' house for a friendly meal. Wow, can you believe she's not doing anything even though she's about to have her baby? What kind of parent does that make her? When I opened the front door, I saw my daughter Jessica and her husband Thomas. Thomas looked unhappy and started complaining about the dusty floor and dirty bathroom. He seemed to think that because Jessica wasn't cleaning, it was my fault as her parent. I tried to explain that Jessica's pregnant belly made it hard for her to clean, but Thomas didn't listen. Instead, he said he was leaving Jessica because she couldn't keep the house clean. My name is Rebecca, and I'm 54 years old. I work for a big company, and it's just been me and Jessica since her dad passed away. Raising Jessica by myself was tough, but her happiness always made it worth it. Jessica is a kind and caring person with good friends, but she struggled to find a boyfriend. I hoped she'd meet someone in high school or college, but she didn't. Eventually, she started dating a guy she met through a friend, and they got engaged after a couple of years. I was happy for her, even though it meant she'd move out soon. Jessica's husband, Thomas, is older than her and really focused on his career. He often stays late at work or goes out, leaving Jessica to do all the chores. I thought they should share the chores, but I didn't want to interfere too much in their lives. Then, about 6 months after their wedding, Jessica invited me to lunch to tell me she's pregnant. Jessica always loved children, even though she didn't have any siblings herself. She used to talk about wanting a little brother or sister. But since I didn't plan to remarry, I couldn't give her that. Despite being married, Jessica still wanted kids, and she spoke to her belly with love, showing how excited she was to become a mom. Seeing her like this made me really happy. As we said goodbye after lunch, I reminded Jessica that I'm here for her if she needs anything. During Jessica's pregnancy, she kept working, so I made sure to check on her often. But when I got a big work project that meant I'd be traveling a lot, I worried about leaving her. Jessica reassured me she'd be fine, so I threw myself into my work. By the time Jessica was close to giving birth, my project was almost done, and things were calming down at work. I called Jessica to talk about plans for when the baby arrived, but Thomas answered the phone instead. He said Jessica was being useless and that he was bringing her over to my place. An hour later, the doorbell rang. Opening the door, I found Jessica looking really messy next to Thomas when I opened the door. She seemed different, not even able to muster a smile. Her eyes had dark circles under them, and her hair, nails, and skin looked dry. She didn't look like a woman in her 20s at all. Her hands were cracked and bleeding, and she seemed distant, staring off into space. How could she have changed so much in just a few months? I let them inside and had them sit down. Since Jessica couldn't speak, I asked Thomas what was going on. "Thomas, why is Jessica like this?" I demanded. He seemed surprised and didn't show any shame as he replied, "Are you blaming me? She's the one who slowed down because of her big belly. You know, housework is a woman's job, and she even faked being sick to get out of it." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. You made a pregnant Jessica do all the chores, even when she was feeling sick. Pregnancy isn't an illness, you know. She even asked me for help with the chores while I've been working all day. Anyway, she's struggling and not able to do her chores. So please take care of her until she gives birth. That's when I realized this man had no clue about pregnancy or being a good father. I couldn't trust him to take care of my daughter. "Okay, I'll take care of her. I can't rely on you to look after her properly." When I told Thomas, he snapped back, "Well, if your daughter's a mess, it's because you didn't raise her right. She doesn't even know how to treat her husband without a father figure. I'm the one suffering here. Once the baby's born, come get it. And in the meantime, teach your daughter how to behave, Rebecca." Before he left, he told me to fix my daughter's upbringing before the baby arrived. Then he just walked away, leaving Jessica behind. I couldn't believe his nerve. I regretted letting Jessica marry him deeply. She just sat there, looking so lost. First things first, I needed to make her feel safe. So I went to the kitchen, poured some milk into her favorite cup with a bit of sugar, and warmed it up. "Be careful, it's hot," I warned her as I handed it over. As Jessica sipped the warm milk, she couldn't hold back her tears. They streamed down her face as she sobbed. I sat beside her, comforting her with a gentle rub on her back, ready to listen to whatever she needed to say. Jessica opened up about Thomas. Despite her pregnancy, he continued going to work parties and leaving her alone when she needed him. He wouldn't lift a finger to help around the house and even demanded she do chores when she was feeling sick from being pregnant. "Hey, get up. "You've been lounging around. You haven't done the dishes or laundry," he'd say. Sometimes, he'd come home after drinking with colleagues and make her cook and clean for them. I felt my anger rising, hearing how my pregnant daughter was being treated like a servant. Jessica explained that she didn't want to risk my career, so she put up with it. She even asked doctors to explain to Thomas of the changes her body was going through, but he wouldn't listen. Her own family lived too far away to help, and she'd always put others before herself. I hugged Jessica tightly and whispered, "From now on, it's okay to put yourself first, Jessica. If you need help, don't hesitate to ask. I'm sorry I didn't realize sooner." I gently stroked her head, and she whispered back, "Mom, thank you," before breaking down into childlike sobs. In the days that followed, Jessica's emotional state seemed to worsen as her due date neared. When I came home from work, I found the house spotless. Despite my insistence that she rest, Jessica kept doing chores. She'd even try to move heavy things or fix broken light bulbs. Sometimes she'd pack her bags, scared of facing her husband's anger. I thought she might need professional help, so I reached out to our neighbor, Lisa, who used to be a therapist, and asked for a recommendation for a counseling clinic. "Lisa, hi, you have a moment? I need to talk about my daughter," I said as she welcomed me into her home. I shared Jessica's situation with her and her husband, Kevin, and they recommended a good clinic. Jessica had been feeling unwell, so she started going to the hospital. Lisa and Kevin were worried about her, so when I was at work, Lisa would check in on her. Thankfully, Jessica started to feel better and smile more like she used to. When Jessica's due date arrived, I took her to the hospital as her contractions started. I stayed by her side, rubbing her back and wiping her sweat, cheering her on. When it was time for her to go into the delivery room, I waited anxiously until I heard the baby cry. A nurse told me that both Jessica and the baby were healthy, which was a huge relief. When I went to see them, Jessica was holding our sleeping baby in her arms. Despite my anger towards Thomas, I still let him know that our baby girl was born healthy. When he entered the hospital room and saw the baby, he made hurtful comments. "Yuck. Babies look like monkeys, not cute at all. Jessica, you're not even wearing makeup and just lying in bed. You're so lazy. Put some effort into how you look. You're a woman." The nurses and doctors who heard him were furious. They surrounded Thomas, yelling at him for not being supportive. But Thomas just got more irritated and snapped back, "Shut up. My mom was working even right after giving birth. This is clearly laziness. I've never heard of a woman going back to work right after having a baby, and it's unlikely Thomas's mom did that. Something must have twisted his memory. He's never shown any interest in pregnancy or childbirth, so it's no surprise he doesn't understand." Thomas stormed out and didn't even bother showing up on Jessica's discharge day. There were no signs of him coming to pick her up. Concerned about sending Jessica back to Thomas, I offered for her to stay with me, but Jessica insisted on going home, saying it wouldn't be fair for the baby to grow up without a father. Reluctantly, I called Thomas to see if he would come get them. His response was dismissive, saying he was too busy with work and didn't want to deal with a crying baby. Then he hung up. I brought Jessica and the baby home, suggesting she stay with me until she got the hang of parenting. Thomas hadn't bothered to buy any baby supplies, so we went shopping together to make sure they had everything they needed. He hadn't even thought of a name for the baby because work was all he cared about, so Jessica and I chose one together. We named her Sarah. Our neighbors, Lisa and her husband, knew about the situation and helped out with looking after Sarah. With their support, Sarah grew up well. About 3 months after Sarah's birth, Thomas suddenly showed up unannounced to take Jessica and Sarah back. "Hey, I'm here to pick you up. Hurry up, you're always so slow," Thomas yelled from the front door. But Jessica had reached a point where she fully understood how terrible Thomas was and had decided to divorce him. She refused to be controlled by him anymore. "I'm not coming back home. I'll send you the divorce papers," she replied firmly from behind the door. Thomas couldn't believe it. "Are you kidding me? In today's world, a man with a wife and kids is more likely to succeed. What's the point of being married to you if we divorce?" "I'm never getting divorced," he yelled back. My daughter was furious, realizing that Thomas had only married her and had a child for the sake of his career. Before I could say anything, our neighbors, Lisa and her husband Kevin, came out of their house. Thomas went pale when he saw Kevin, who turned out to be his boss. "Boss, what are you doing here?" Thomas stammered as Lisa and Kevin approached. Kevin, clearly disappointed, said, "So, you're Jessica's husband. It's unbelievable that someone like you, who neglected his child for 3 months, turns out to be you. You lack empathy, and I can't trust my team with someone like you. I'll inform the CEO, and your promotion is canceled." Thomas pleaded with Kevin, but Kevin was unmoved. "You don't even want to listen. You only ever cared about your work." Thomas cried, clinging to Kevin in desperation. Kevin didn't allow Thomas to say anything more. Thomas, feeling defeated, dropped to his knees. Kevin, known as a family man both in the neighborhood and at work, couldn't stand to see Thomas treating his family so poorly. It turned out that Thomas had been pretending to be a good husband and father at work to boost his chances of promotion. Quietly, Thomas went home that day, but at the office, he started pestering his colleagues and subordinates, asking them to put in a good word for him with the boss for a promotion. When no one complied, he went straight to the CEO. "Sir, I've worked hard for this company every day. My sales numbers are consistently high. Please approve my promotion," he pleaded with the CEO. But the CEO had already heard from Kevin. "Your performance numbers might look good, but you've been using aggressive tactics to win contracts," the CEO said. "Just raising your own numbers isn't enough. A deal that tarnishes the company's image is a failure, even if it's successful. If you can't understand that, you won't move up. I have no more expectations for you." Thomas left the CEO's office looking defeated. The CEO, who occasionally appears on TV and is known for his integrity, made his decision based on more than just reports from Thomas's boss. It was a clear message to Thomas. He lost his motivation for work, started making more mistakes, and was eventually transferred to a regional department with very little work. At least he didn't lose his job entirely. After his transfer, Thomas kept coming to our house, begging for another chance and wanting to see Sarah. Both Jessica and I ignored him, but when he became too persistent, Kevin warned him that he would report him to the CEO, which could get him fired. After that, Thomas stopped bothering us. It became clear that his affection was shallow. When Kevin found out that Jessica was struggling to get her divorce approved, he referred her to a top-notch attorney. The divorce went through smoothly, and she even received compensation for emotional distress. Meanwhile, Thomas was transferred and seemed to be living a quiet, lonely life in a rural area. I heard this from Kevin. Kevin mentioned that the last time Thomas came into the office, he looked completely different. His shirt and suit were wrinkled, he had grown a beard, and he had lost a lot of weight. In the small town where Thomas moved, it's not easy to get to a dry cleaner or convenience store without a car. Maybe he's trying to save on gas or simply can't be bothered, but if he's not using these services, he'll have to take care of himself. Since Thomas never lifted a finger to help with housework and always said it was a woman's job, he probably doesn't know how to do anything for himself. He must regret treating Jessica like a servant now that he's all alone. Perhaps Thomas feels like he's lost everything since the divorce and losing custody. He even started to forget the child support payments he promised to make for Sarah. Whenever Jessica reminds him, he apparently tells her how tough his life is, almost in tears. I advised Jessica to inform her lawyer, and as soon as she requested child support through legal channels, it got paid. So far, we haven't heard anything from Thomas about wanting to see Sarah. If Sarah wants to, we'll reach out. But Jessica and I agreed that we'll pour lots of love into raising her into a fine adult even without a father around. I'm Kiona. I'm 30 years old, and I stay at home taking care of the house. My husband, Aoki, is 6 years older than me, and we've been living with his parents for 2 years. Aoki's parents, Robert and Barbara, are both in their 60s, and they're healthy and full of energy. Barbara, Aoki's mom, really likes going out and having fun. Since I moved in, I've noticed she hardly ever does any chores around the house. Even though she doesn't work outside the home, she doesn't do much inside either. She used to be a stay-at-home mom, but now she leaves most of the housework to me. Sometimes she'll tell me to go have fun while she stays home, but then she'll complain if things aren't done when she comes back. I've been dealing with this situation, trying my best to not get too frustrated. Whenever I try to explain to my mother-in-law that I might not finish everything before she leaves, she brushes it off. She says it's normal to do a lot of chores and criticizes my generation for not being able to handle it. wishing I could be more like Aoki. It's not just the remarks that bother me. Barbara constantly praises Aoki, especially because he works for a big company, which she's really proud of. She often says things like, "Aoki works so hard, but his wife isn't doing well." It's like her favorite phrase, and Aoki doesn't defend me. During dinner, Barbara starts complaining about me, and Aoki just responds with a simple, "Oh really?" showing little interest. When I first met Aoki, I thought he was mature because he was older. But things have changed. It feels like he sees me only as a maid. Even when I'm working late into the night, he doesn't say anything to me. Instead, he tosses laundry at me, aiming for my face, and says, "Here, do this too." I regret marrying someone like him. Since we got married, he's changed a lot. On our first anniversary, he bought a cake, but then threw a pie in my face and laughed. You wouldn't think he's a grown man. But there's one bright spot in my life, and that's my father-in-law, Robert. He's really calm and always asks if I need help with anything. He's the only one who treats me kindly in this house. Since I quit my job when I got married, he's the only person I can really talk to. I've grown to love Robert like a real father. But Robert works during the day, so he's not home much. That means I'm often alone with Barbara. When I talk to Robert, Barbara doesn't say anything, but I can tell she doesn't like it, and her attitude towards me has gotten worse. She started accusing me of making eyes at my father-in-law just because Aoki ignores me. She'd say these things when Robert couldn't hear. I tried to defend myself, saying it wasn't true, but she just brushed it off. "Did I touch a nerve?" she'd say, acting like I was overreacting. No matter what I said, she always had a snarky comeback. Our talks never really connected. I talked to Aoki about it, hoping he'd understand it was just Barbara's imagination. But he just laughed it off. "So now you're into older men too," he joked. It was clear nothing would change. I didn't expect him to help with chores or stop Barbara's teasing, but I never thought he'd say something like that. It was a big shock. I started feeling like I didn't belong in that house. One summer day, Barbara mentioned planning a family trip for Aoki's summer break. At first, I thought it was just her usual desire to go out, but then she surprised me by asking if I wanted to come along. I didn't expect to be invited. I thought they would go without me. When I hesitated, Barbara seemed suspicious and asked if I didn't want to go. I felt uneasy about her sudden invitation. What did she want by including me? I was unsure, but I didn't know how she would react if I said no. That night, Aoki asked me again if I was going on the trip. I replied that I was invited. His response was unexpected. He burst out laughing for some reason. "What's so funny?" I asked, feeling uneasy. Aoki just brushed it off, saying it was nothing. On the day of the trip, we set off with Aoki driving. Robert couldn't join us right away due to work, so it was just the three of us in the car. Aoki driving, Barbara in the passenger seat, and me in the back. I couldn't see their faces clearly, which made me even more anxious. Barbara suddenly asked if I had withdrawn some money for the trip. I confirmed that I had taken out a few $100s. She seemed pleased at this, which struck me as odd. After driving for a while, I noticed we had passed the inn we were supposed to stay at. "Did we just pass the inn?" I asked. Aoki replied vaguely, saying there was a tourist spot ahead and we'd check in after seeing it. His smile seemed forced, and I sensed something strange was going on. As we drove away from the inn, the scenery outside turned greener. I let out a quiet sigh, making sure neither Barbara nor Aoki heard me. Eventually, we arrived at a dam. It wasn't very big, and there weren't many people around. "Let's get out and stretch our legs," Barbara suggested eagerly. "And make sure not to leave anything valuable in the car," Aoki added. I followed their instructions, stepping out of the car. But I noticed Barbara and Aoki hesitating, pretending to be busy inside the car. Once I stepped out and closed the door, I heard the car lock click. Aoki had only left the windows slightly open. Then he burst into laughter. "What's going on? Are we staying here for the night?" I felt anger bubbling up towards Barbara, but I kept it in check. "What do you mean?" I asked, trying to keep my cool. "You walked right into that one, didn't you?" My husband was laughing so hard he was clutching his stomach. My wallet and cell phone were still in the car. Everything had gone according to Barbara and my husband's plan. "Have fun out here, Kiona," Barbara sneered. "Maybe you can eat some grass and sleep under the stars." My husband, holding my wallet and going through it, closed the window. His laughter died down, and then they drove off, leaving me alone. Well, they're a handful, and it's hot, I muttered to myself. Even though it was scorching hot and I was at risk of dehydration, I surprisingly didn't panic. An hour later. Why are you here? My husband was stunned to see me in the lobby of the inn where we were supposed to stay. Are you a ghost? Did something happen at the dam? He asked, looking bewildered. Barbara looked like she was about to pass out. I considered teasing them by pretending to be a ghost but decided against it. I'm not a ghost and I'm staying here tonight, I told them, showing them the key to my room. I had already left my luggage there. My husband couldn't grasp the situation and started to get agitated. He thought I had taken the key to their room without permission. What are you doing? Give it back, he demanded, trying to grab the key from me roughly. Just then, a man appeared and grabbed my husband's hand. Sir, please refrain from causing a disturbance here, the man said firmly. He was about the same age as Robert, but he had a strong build and was taller, making him seem more dependable than my middle-aged, slightly overweight husband. Who are you? Are you staff here? You can't just interfere with a guest like this. I'll sue you for assault. Barbara yelled at the man who had intervened. I apologize for not introducing myself earlier. I am the owner of this inn, the man replied calmly. Hearing this, my husband quickly let go of my hand. I recognized the owner. Back when I was in college, I had visited this area with my friends during summer vacation. It was scorching hot that day, and we got lost on our way to our accommodation. Eventually, we stumbled upon a girl collapsed on the side of the road. That girl was Mary, the owner's daughter. We called an ambulance and stayed with her until help arrived. The next day, the owner visited us at the inn where we were staying and thanked us profusely. He said, "You saved my daughter's life. Thank you so much." He also offered, "We own this inn too, so next time you're in the area, please stay with us. You won't have to pay." Since then, my family and I have visited the inn several times, so I knew the owner well. As he reprimanded my husband and Barbara, he remained polite, but I could sense his underlying anger. In fact, both the owner and I were aware of Barbara and my husband's scheme from the beginning. I had caught wind of their plan 2 weeks ago. Feeling suspicious about their sudden invitation for a trip, I decided to set up a voice recorder in the living room. I targeted times when my husband and Barbara were alone, like when I was taking a bath or doing laundry, and their plan came to light. I know, let's ditch Kiana somewhere. It would be hilarious. How about here? There's a gym about an hour's drive from the inn. When I heard their conversation, I was shocked. I immediately called the inn and told the owner everything about the situation I was in and what they were planning. The owner was furious. He himself had once experienced his daughter collapsing in the heat, so he was even more upset. Knowing the situation beforehand, the owner arranged for my pickup today. After my husband and Barbara's car left, he had me ride in the inn show. By the way, the driver turned out to be Mary from that incident years ago. I got my license. Let's go for a drive, she said excitedly. Right now? I asked, surprised. Oh, that's great, I replied. We chatted happily, bought some local specialty ice cream on the way, and arrived at the inn. Even though I knew about the plan and that a pickup was coming, I was still worried for Mary. But she knew the area like the back of her hand. So we arrived at the inn several tens of minutes earlier than my husband and Barbara. You mentioned suing earlier, ma'am, the owner said, looking at Barbara sternly. Yes, I did. It's outrageous to be accused of the opposite, Barbara retorted. I'm sorry, but you're not our guests, the owner replied firmly. What? Don't mess with us. My husband and Barbara both lost their temper. Your and your mother's reservations have been canceled, the owner stated plainly. I added you. Who do you think you are? My husband was on the verge of losing his temper again, but the owner restrained him. Kiana did nothing wrong. We, the inn, canceled your reservations, the owner explained calmly. What do you mean? My husband demanded. If you leave a woman alone at a dam in the mountains after stealing her wallet, wouldn't you be committing a crime? We can't allow such people to stay at our inn. We also called the police. My husband and mother-in-law became even more furious at this revelation. This is no joke. Don't think you can get away with this. I work at our company, my husband protested. This little inn in the mountains. Just then, Robert arrived. Hey, what's going on here? Sensing the tension, Robert looked around and asked for an explanation. Barbara and my husband appealed to Robert, saying the inn staff were rude and they wanted to stay elsewhere. But when Robert heard what had happened, he was furious. "You idiots." It was the first time I had seen Robert yell. How embarrassing. "I can't believe we're from the same family. You two, get out of here now." My husband and mother-in-law were stunned by Robert's outburst. "Where to?" "Another inn," they asked. But Robert was firm. "Wait a minute, that's not possible, Dad," my husband said with a wry smile. But Robert was resolute. "You're disowned. Get out." "No, don't make me say it again." He pushed my husband away. Then the police arrived and my husband and Barbara turned pale. The owner and I explained the situation to the officer, and I played back the recorded conversation. My husband and Barbara started crying. But Robert intervened. "Quiet down. You're disturbing the inn. Officer, please take them away." "It's not like that, officer. We didn't think it would be such a big deal. It was just a prank," my husband tried to explain. But the officer's expression changed. "A prank? Are you serious? Don't you realize that your little joke could have put someone's life at risk, especially your own wife's?" They were scolded harshly. Though they weren't arrested due to it being a family matter, Barbara and my husband looked pale throughout the ordeal. "This isn't over. Kirana's feelings will determine your future. Understand?" With those final words, my husband and Barbara, still pale, went home. Robert seemed apologetic the entire time. He kept saying, "I'm really, really sorry. I can't apologize enough for not noticing the unpleasant experiences you have been having, for the terrible ordeal you went through today." He also deeply apologized to the inn owner, expressing remorse for the trouble they caused. Interestingly, the inn owner is a businessman who runs several other companies and is also a client of the company where Robert works. Without knowing this, my husband had boasted, "I work for a big company. I'm relieved I was able to hold my husband and Barbara accountable. But it's also frightening to think what could have happened if I hadn't known about their plan beforehand. I hope being scolded by the police makes them realize the seriousness of their actions." After returning from the inn, I decided to divorce my husband. Naturally, I demanded a significant alimony. I hope they learn from this experience and refrain from hurting anyone else in the future. It's quite a turn of events. Robert and Barbara ended up divorcing as well. Robert severed ties with my ex-husband and kicked him out of the house. Due to the incident, my ex-husband was advised to resign from his job. It turns out his workplace behavior had been problematic for a while. Just as he treated me poorly, he had been harsh to his colleagues and juniors, and the HR department was already considering taking action against him. Reflecting on my own actions, I'm disappointed that I mirrored such behavior. My ex-husband, now unemployed, is struggling to find another job. Despite his age, he lacks a solid track record for managerial positions from his previous company, and he struggles to explain why he left. Barbara was also kicked out by Robert and has sought refuge with relatives at her parents' home. However, there are concerns about her spending habits and love for travel. Her relatives fear she might drain their savings if she moves in with them. It might be wise for her to consider finding a part-time job, especially since she's still in good health. So I moved out of my in-laws' house and now live nearby by myself. I'm still friends with Robert, and sometimes I ask him for advice about work issues. Before this, I used to take care of the house and kids, but now I'm starting a new chapter in my life. When I was looking for a job, the owner of a company approached me and asked if I'd like to work for them. He was really concerned about how things were going for me. It seemed like he wanted to find a job for me in his company. I happily agreed to join. I felt really thankful for his kindness. I expressed my gratitude, but he insisted that they were the ones who should be grateful. It felt like I had already returned the favor from before, and now I needed to give something back. The company he recommended me to is well known and treats its employees well. It was a pleasant surprise. Interestingly, it's in the same industry that my ex-husband used to brag about, but this company is much bigger. Everyone there is friendly, and I'm enjoying my days much more now than when I was dealing with marital problems. My husband yelled at me on the phone, saying he wants a divorce. I thought as I came back from my work trip. He's fed up with me, but I've had enough too. If I say sorry, maybe he'll change his mind. I understand, I said to him on the phone. But instead of going to my husband's parents' house where he was, I went somewhere else. My name is Sophie, and I'm 28 years old. I got married to David, who is 2 years older than me, 3 years ago. To be frank, David is the son of the future CEO of the company where I work. Originally, I worked somewhere else, but after marrying David, I changed jobs. Now, I'm working hard in the same company as him, aiming to become the CEO's wife someday. David wasn't sure about me working there, but when the current CEO, who is his dad, ordered it, there wasn't much to discuss. My job keeps me really busy, and I often have to go on long business trips. We've been wanting to have a baby, but with our hectic schedules, it's been hard to relax enough for that. Lately, things between David and me haven't been great. We're both really busy, and we end up arguing about small stuff a lot. Just the other day, David got mad at me as I was getting ready to leave for work. "Hey Sophie, why didn't you wake me up when I asked you to?" "I did wake you up a few times, David, but you yelled at me to leave you alone and said you'd wake up by yourself, so I went ahead and made breakfast." "What? I never said anything like that. Don't lie to me." "I'm not lying. I tried to wake you up at least 20 times and your alarm was blaring the whole time. You can't imagine what's going to happen if I'm late today. I'll get chewed out by my dad again. Why do I have to be the one who gets yelled at when it's his fault for not waking up?" At first, I put up with my husband's unfair scolding, but eventually, I started standing up for myself. This led to a big fight recently where he said, "I want a divorce." Thankfully, our in-laws stepped in and stopped things from getting worse. Still, I was getting really tired of him bringing up divorce every time we argued. One day, while I was getting ready for a business trip, my husband came up to me looking upset. "Hey Sophie, you're leaving for another trip, huh?" My husband always calls my business trips like they're not important. It's not just a trip, it's a business trip. "Why do I have to keep explaining this to you?" I replied, feeling frustrated. "Must be nice always going on trips and neglecting the housework. You're probably just going sightseeing after pushing all the house chores on me, right? Listen, that's enough. This is for your company, you know. Why can't you just accept that it's a business trip?" I can't imagine how it's like to be a rookie like you going on a business trip. Being so useful is pretty much just like a trip. What the hell is wrong with you? Can't you tell the difference between a trip and a business trip? Well, it's the truth, isn't it? You say I'm dumping the house chores on you, but you've never done anything around the house when I'm away on a business trip. When I'm not around, my husband only ever orders takeout, leaves the laundry piled up, and doesn't even take out the garbage. Despite doing nothing, his attitude gives me so much stress. Even the divorce drama last time was all because of his personality. Even though we both work and spend the same amount of time on our jobs, all the housework is left to me. On top of that, he acts all superior and domineering, which I couldn't stand. Trying to discuss it with him is pointless as he never admits to any fault on his part. Instead, he always turns it around and blames me. As I continued getting ready for my business trip in silence, my husband started yelling at me again. For goodness sake, the wife of the future CEO shouldn't be taking business trips so lightly. If you're not assertive like me, the other employees will walk all over you. That's exactly why I'm working hard. I need to learn the job and meet with different clients. And yes, being the CEO's son helps. But we also have to acknowledge the efforts of all the employees who work hard to keep the company running smoothly. What are you talking about? The company's success is because of the hard work of all the employees, not just because you're the CEO's son. You should work as hard as everyone else. At those words, my husband got really angry and shouted, "What do you mean, work harder?" The other day, I overheard some employees talking. They said you always pass off overtime and difficult tasks to others and complain a lot. What? Who said that? I'll fire them immediately. That's not the point. Can't you see that you're the one in the wrong here? Can't you see that you're just riding on your father's reputation? My husband's eyes widened with anger, and he grabbed my bangs roughly. Don't get too ahead of yourself. Who do you think got you this job in the first place? Ouch, let go. You're only able to work at this prestigious company because you're married to me, got it? Refuse the business trip. I won't allow you to neglect our home for some work trip. I've explained it many times, it's for my job. I can't just refuse. Shut up. Stop arguing back. You married me, so you should just listen quietly to what I say. Suddenly, his grip on my hair loosened, and I stumbled back onto the floor. If this argument keeps going, it might end up in another threat of divorce. I managed to push my husband out of the room and focus on getting ready for my business trip. When I come back, I'll have to deal with a week's worth of chores piled up by my husband. I bet the laundry will still be there, and the trash will be overflowing. Just thinking about it made me feel exhausted even before the trip. The next day, as planned, I headed off on my business trip. I focused on my work and didn't let personal issues get in the way. When I got back home after a week, I couldn't believe what I saw. I'm back. The house was sparkling clean, just like the day I left for my business trip. It was a pleasant surprise. Thank goodness. Maybe David finally understood how I felt. Perhaps he had a change of heart and decided to help with the housework. Just as I started feeling relieved that my husband was being more supportive, I saw divorce papers on the table. What? What's this? There was a note next to them saying, "I'm going back to my parents' place. We're getting a divorce." Panicked, I quickly called my husband, and he picked up right away. Huh? Did you even read the divorce papers? His casual tone angered me, and I snapped back. Wait, are you seriously talking about divorcing me? Of course. You'd be in trouble if I did, wouldn't you? Don't talk about divorce so casually. Then my husband, sounding smug, said, "If you're going to take it that seriously," and started laying out conditions. "If you start taking care of the house and listen to me, I might think about canceling the divorce. But of course, no more trips." What? Like you, it wasn't just a trip. Huh? Are you talking back? If you are, then I'm divorcing you. You're such a nag. A nag? He calls me a nag when he can't even do a single thing around the house himself. If he's up for it, so am I. Fine. If you don't want to get divorced, then come and apologize. Do you understand? Holding back my urge to argue, I replied calmly, "Okay, I understand. You should have listened to me from the beginning. Now come quickly." With that, he hung up. Instead of going to my in-laws' house where he was, I headed to City Hall. I submitted the divorce papers and they were accepted without any trouble. I was officially single again. 3 hours later, while I was packing up at home, my ex-husband came back with his mother, probably fed up with waiting for me. As soon as they saw me, they started hurling insults. "Hey, how long are you going to keep me waiting? That's right, you're a failure as a wife, yet you're out having fun. You should be taking care of David." Taking care of? How old is David? He's older than me, isn't he? I fired back, feeling frustrated. As I retorted, their brows furrowed in anger. "Shut up, stop being stubborn, and apologize quickly. We're really going through with the divorce. If anyone will be in trouble if we get divorced, it's you, Sophie. You could have been the wife of the next company president, and you're okay with acting this way? And you. If you divorce me, you won't be able to live in this luxurious lifestyle. Are you okay with that? Well, I never thought you were a good match for David in the first place, so I really don't care." At a loss for words, my ex-husband grinned devilishly. "Fine, this is your last chance. If you don't apologize now, we're getting a divorce. I'll even kick you out of the company. Decide quickly." At that moment, anger surged through me like a fireball. I had to make him understand the reality of the situation. "We're already divorced, you know." "What?" "Just as you wished. I've already submitted the divorce papers and they've been accepted, so I'm no longer your wife." "What?" Her ex-husband and mother-in-law stood there in shock. After a moment of silence, he finally spoke up. "What are you talking about? This must be a joke, right? You wouldn't?" "Why would I lie? If you don't believe me, you can check the records yourself." "No way." Suddenly, the mother-in-law, who had been listening, started to shout. "Wait, Sophie, what have you done? You've put divorce on David's record, our future CEO. It was your son who gave me the divorce papers first. All I did was submit them." "Stop making excuses. Cancel the divorce right now. Do you understand? I'm sorry, but once the divorce papers have been accepted, they can't be canceled. And I have no intention of canceling anyway." "What?" The mother-in-law was speechless, and the ex-husband just hung his head in defeat. Ignoring them, I continued, "I'm tired of being ridiculed every time I go on a business trip and having to juggle work and housework every day. As far as I'm concerned, you're nothing but a burden." "So Sylvie, calm down." "Calm down. I'm perfectly calm. What's the point of being married if it's just a title? All you care about is yourself, isn't it? I didn't mean it like that. Do you realize you're losing your status as the CEO's wife? Are you okay with that? I didn't join your company to become the CEO's wife. I don't know how much you've been spoiled, but I didn't marry you to take care of you. Are you really willing to give up this lifestyle? If you just wait a little longer, you could become the CEO's wife. I absolutely refuse to keep being your caretaker. I'm not your mother. Just go and live your life on your own." With an intensity like never before, my husband was completely teary-eyed. His mother-in-law took her turn, stuttering out her final provocation. "What if you divorce David? You'll also lose your job." "And what if I do?" "What?" "I've already informed your father that I'll be quitting the company." "What?" The mother-in-law and ex-husband's eyes widened in surprise. To confirm, my ex-husband started calling his father. After a few rings, his father answered, and he put the call on speaker. "Dad, listen to this. Sophie decided to divorce me on her own." "Yeah, I heard. She told me she's quitting the company too. She's so selfish. Can't you fire her immediately with your CEO powers?" "Well, I guess I should fire someone ASAP." "You?" "Yeah, that's right. Wait, what?" Instead of the stunned ex-husband, his mother-in-law turned to her husband. "What do you mean by that?" "There's nothing to explain. David is a liability who doesn't contribute anything to the company. I'm disappointed in his work ethic." "Wait, what? How can you suddenly say that about our son?" "Stay quiet," the father-in-law firmly told his wife. "David, your performance at work is lacking. You misuse company resources, make inappropriate advances towards female colleagues, and complain about trivial things like the cafeteria. You're just not cutting it. Do you think I don't know that your subordinates consider you incompetent?" No, that's not true. It can't be. I can't protect you any longer, even if you're my son. You understand this, right? Just because you're the boss's son doesn't mean you get special treatment. But that doesn't mean you have to fire me. The only thing I can commend you for is marrying a capable wife. Sophie will continue to work for the company, but you're fired, David." At his father's words, my ex-husband's eyes widened in shock. Unfazed by his reaction, the father-in-law continued, "Unlike you, Sophie is diligent in her work and brings in a lot of contracts. She's highly respected by our clients. Many companies have chosen to work with us because of her. But she was only sent on business trips because she's new. Don't be ridiculous. We trusted Sophie, so we gave her more responsibilities. You made fun of her, calling it a vacation or something, didn't you?" No, I didn't. "Let me make it clear. There's no place for you here until you become independent. Never come back to this house, understood?" No way. And so, my ex-husband was disowned by his father-in-law, lost his job, and couldn't even return to his parents' home. When his mother tried to defend him, his father blamed her for spoiling him and gave her a divorce notice too. They used up their savings to live in an apartment, but they struggled to find work, and their unemployment continued. I still received messages from my ex-husband. "Sophie, I was wrong. I won't make fun of you anymore. I promise to take care of myself, so please come back. I can't take it anymore. Help me." He was so persistent that I finally blocked his number. I shouldn't have to deal with that mama's boy anymore. On the other hand, I'm still working hard under my father-in-law, who is now the CEO. I have my own team, and I'm enjoying fulfilling days. I'm grateful that my father-in-law is a supportive manager. From now on, I want to pursue my goals without being held back by meaningless family ties.